All right, y'all, I'm so excited because I get to hang out with my new friend, entrepreneur, speaker, best-selling author, illusionist, what do you not do, Harris the Third. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It feels inclusive of a lot of things.
Yeah. You have lots of talents, lots of interests, but I'm so excited because when I was researching about what you do and your work, and so many people speak so highly of you, you have some really fascinating interests, but also even the topics you cover. So just to kick it off, tell our audience a little bit about what you do, and then we'll dig into your book and a little bit of your story.
Oh, goodness. I mean, it's so many things, but at the heart of it all is the experience of magic.
Okay.
And what's interesting is I think of magic differently than most people think of magic when they hear about someone like me.
Yeah.
Historically, I've made most of my living as an illusionist. And so I kind of come into most of my perspectives from the background of someone who spent literally most of their lives traveling in the world doing what you would call a magic show. But somewhere along the way realized that it wasn't really magic, which is ironic to me because you look at it and call it magic, but deep down we all know it's totally fake. They're just tricks. I don't have any sort of supernatural powers.
Right.
But that made me realize that magic isn't necessarily what we see a magician do on stage. It's that sense of wonder that we feel in response to something that we come in contact with that feels mysterious or previously assumed would be impossible. And I thought, well, man, if I can make people feel that sense of wonder, then that means anybody can do that, not just magicians. So you create magic through this show and the work that you do. All the people behind the cameras and the microphones right now, they're all creating magic. We can all live a magical life.
That's so interesting, your perspective on that. Because even the idea, the topic of wonder, I think it sounds like one of those things like, yeah, I want that. Like you see kids and how childlike and how innocent and how excited they get. And as adults, we lose that, and we just kind of go through the motions and the day-to-day schedule and commitments. And I love how you are inviting people into a different experience of their life where wonder is a piece of it and possibilities are limitless and you can have that magic as you described. So for you, the background in being an illusionist is kind of what set you on this path.
Yeah.
Since you've now gone on this path, what have you learned about how wonder affects our lives? Because now you're taking it a whole new angle. So what have you learned for yourself and what are you...
It's another long list. It's like I've failed so much, therefore I have learned so much, which is probably why I'm so many things when you name off that list. I made $1 million doing magic shows by the time I was 21 years old. Wow. And that's a pretty crazy experience for a lot of people. The other part of that story is that I was bankrupt by 22.
Wow.
And just being in this studio and all the things that you guys are involved with, it's not an unfamiliar story, right?
Right.
And it's interesting when you're 21 and you become a millionaire, and then when you go bankrupt, it forces you to take a step back and go, how did this happen? How in the world did I go from this to this? And for me, it led me to ask questions like, how did I get tricked into believing these things that I believe, these lies essentially that I thought life was all about? And that's an ironic question to ask when you have been trained on how to trick people for a living. How did I get tricked into believing these things? And I really noticed that there were these sort of principles of deception that were universal. And the same way that I trick someone in a magic show is really the same way that we're all tricked into believing anything that isn't true. And I thought, well, gosh, I have the greatest tool in the world to teach people how they get led to believe the things that they believe. And that's what we think magicians are really about. But as I got further into my journey, I realized it's not about tricking people, but there is this sort of counterfeit version of life that we settle for that gets sold to us. How do we get back to what is real? And I realized that most people don't believe in what is real. So when I throw out a word like magic, people sort of roll their eyes in cynicism and they're like, magic, like I'll believe in that when I see it. Roald Dahl famously said, those who don't believe in magic will never find it. In other words, you have to believe in magic before you're able to see it. And so there's magic all around us, sometimes right in front of our eyes. We have forgotten how to believe in it, and therefore we're blinded to it. But it doesn't take much more than a few magic tricks to show that seeing is not believing. So a lot of us go, well, how do I believe? Do I look around? Do I look harder? Do I open my eyes a little bit wider? That's not really it either. Seeing isn't believing. But what the science confirms, and I talk a lot about this in the book, is that believing is actually seeing. That seeing is not believing, but believing is seeing. And when people hear me say that, cynicism kicks in and it feels a little woo-woo and new agey and magical. And they're like, so I have to believe in something and I just close my eyes and then I wish for it and it manifests itself? That's not it either. If you're looking for a creative solution to a problem that you're trying to solve, for example, the belief in that solution doesn't mean that you found it yet, but the belief that a solution could potentially exist It's what gives you permission to go explore it and
Right.
eventually find it.
Right.
And wonder is essential to that process. So why do I say all that about your question with wonder? Wonder is what gives us permission to believe. It is this childlike state where magic is real, and the belief in that magic gives us permission to go explore those possibilities. And then we end up realizing that more was possible than we originally thought.
I want to come back to that because I think that there's so much there. But I want to go back to something you said really quick first before we move on. You said you had been believing lies. And something that stuck out to me there is I've identified in my own life as well, lies that hold me back, that type of thing. But I work with women every day. I hear their stories. I see this all the time where women are believing lies. Men too. I mean, certainly everyone.
Sure.
They're believing lies, but they don't realize it. So how did you realize that what you were believing was a lie versus accepting it as truth, which is what I see so often, like, oh no, this is how it always has to be, or oh, this is the best I can do, or oh, I'm not cut out for that. They've got excuses for days, Harris, and I'm going like, well, that's not true, and yes, you can. And I'm like this like Pollyanna cheerleader in the corner. How did you realize they were lies to start with? Because that's a huge aha moment.
By flipping the wonder switch back on. That's why wonder is so central to everything. We're all searching for something. We just don't know that it's called wonder. We can't have faith without being in a state of wonder. We can't be creative without being in a state of wonder. We don't have permission to believe in the things we can't see without a state of wonder. And once that wonder switch gets turned back on, it gives us permission to go believe something different. But to take that back to the lies, to more directly answer your question, it has a lot to do with those counterfeits that seem real, right? Like if you go talk to bank tellers and say, how do you spot a counterfeit bill? What I learned, I was surprised to discover this, that bank tellers are not trained to spot a fake by studying what fake bills look and feel like. They're taught what a real, genuine bill looks and feels like in their hands. So they're basically trained in the truth, not in deception.
Okay.
Look, I am what many would consider an expert in deception because I've spent almost 30 years now studying the principles of deception that make magic tricks possible. I know how to fool you as a human being and take advantage of how your senses work. If I still find myself regularly tricked and deceived and believing the lies, and I'm a supposed expert in it, what is our hope of fighting against the lies? It's to become an expert in the truth. Because when you understand the truth, and you have permission to believe it because you're in a state of wonder where that truth is even possibly true, all of a sudden when you come in contact with the counterfeit, you're kind of like, this doesn't feel right to me because I know what is actually true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I love the studying the truth versus studying the counterfeit.
Yes.
So your book that just came out in October, The Wonder Switch, I know you unpack it in this book, but just how do you define wonder? Like as you talk about it, I'm like, yes, I want that. Yes, that makes sense. That totally resonates. Wonder feels like this elusive idea, though. How do you define it or describe it? And then from there, how do you, what's the premise? How do you turn the wonder switch on? Like, for someone that's going, like, how do I do this? What are you talking about?
You're asking deep, big questions.
Oh, no, let's have it. I'm here for it. I am here for it. Give us our 2-minute version of it so we can keep going.
I mean, how do I define it? As it's a childlike state in which we have permission to believe in a story that we have yet to see.
Okay.
So when someone like you regularly through this show introduces new possibilities to people, their cynicism, which is kind of one of the opposites of wonder, has a tendency to push back against that story of possibility.
Yeah, I see that. I hear you when you do that. I get those comments.
Yep.
Thank you for those.
So when there's a lack of wonder and you see those comments, that is responded. Even if that's outside of their conscious awareness, their subconscious is going, nope, I will believe in that when I see it. So wonder is essential to the process of moving from living as if seeing is believing to putting believing before what we see. That what we believe quite literally has the power to change what we see. Okay. So how do we get back to that space of wonder? Well, we have to look at the stories we tell ourselves. So much of this book, even though it's about wonder, is about the stories that we tell ourselves. You and I as human beings are storytelling creatures. We walk around all day long telling ourselves stories to make sense of the world, to find relevancy in things, to stay safe. And our imagination is simply like a virtual reality storytelling tool for the future, right? And so, again, subconsciously, your imagination is fast forwarding in every single experience that you're having going, what happens next in this story? What happens next in this story? Which is why if you are, for example, in the backseat of an Uber, your driver starts texting and driving. Your palms might get sweaty. Your heart might start
He's
beating
going to drive us
faster.
off the road in a second. Like, I'm ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. What's happening? That is the work of imagination, just like creativity is the work of imagination. It's just a different type of creativity, right? And so your brain is trying to keep you safe by sending you signals through your nervous system. Hey, get out of the car. This isn't a safe example right now. However, I think worry is a misuse of imagination. And so all this time that we spend in worry and anxiety, that is us using our imaginations. The position of our wonder switch determines what we use our imagination for. It is a myth that your imagination is active when you're a child and then you grow up and it sort of fades away. You just start misusing it to worry and fear. So to turn the wonder switch back on allows you to examine your imagination. The stories that you are creating in your head allows you to sort of take control of that narrative, restore the parts of it that are broken so you can get back to living from a place of wonder.
I love that, because even as you talk about the things we tell ourselves about our world, our situation, our Uber driver, whatever, I've noticed, especially in women I work with, I've seen this again and again, we tell ourselves stories about ourselves all the time. I'm not a fun mom. I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to get that job. I'm not business-minded. And again, I push back on that, the cheerleader in me, and I'm like, says who? Go do something fun. You're a fun mom. Says who? Go apply, And so I think we place these labels and limitations on ourselves, and then we live within them. But I love how you are calling people, pushing people outside of that to this place of wonder and saying, when you believe, then you're going to take different actions that then lead to different results. And then guess what? That thing that was impossible actually becomes true. Okay, so I want to ask about personality styles.
Okay.
So, we're around this place, we're all like all the DISC, Myers-Briggs, Strengths Finders, Enneagram, it doesn't matter what you like. But I'm always fascinated at how some of the topics I talk about are played out in different personality styles. Me and my husband are complete opposites, like most couples. Wonder, I feel like, comes just real easy for me here. So I'm like, oh, what could we this? And what about this? And I've got 100 ideas a day. And my husband is like, what are the facts? What are the research? Where's the financial statement? Where's the budget? No, I pick on my husband, but I think it's true with my kids. My son Carter, he's like an exact replica of my husband, and he is cautious and he knows exactly, like he wants to control everything and see all the numbers and the formulas. And my son Conley's like, wow, at everything. Wow, I'm a tree. Like, it's like, it comes easy. So what does this look like when you talk about we have different strengths and weaknesses, different personality styles, however you want to categorize it. And what does wonder look like for someone that maybe is more analytical, more skeptical? Those are strengths of being analytical and practical. Lord knows Matt keeps me from running off the cliff and spending all of our money. But how do those personality styles that maybe it's not as natural for them, how do they turn on the wonder switch? How do they engage that childlike faith when, man, their wiring is more practical and skeptical? That's just a part of who they are.
So much we could talk about this. I'm so glad you asked this question, by the way. You're describing my wife and I as well. We do entire workshops with companies like this to try to affect their corporate culture because I think there are wow people. And
how people. Yes. I have talked about this before.
Oh,
yes.
Awesome.
The wow people.
I should have had you write that section of the book for me.
I think someone shared it with me that probably got it from you. But I said it was like years ago someone shared it with me. They probably heard you. But it's like, the wow people are so excited. The how people want to know how. And you see this play out, like you said, in companies though too. Okay, so unpack this for us, because you're probably the one that they got it from, whoever heard this from.
Yeah, so wow people and how. I'm a wow person. My wife is a how person. Sounds like it's flip-flop for you and your husband, the same thing. So, how people, so much of this goes back to narrative. So let me rewind for a second. Those lies that you talk about, that women constantly believing, and men too, right? I think there's only 3 of them. I'm not enough. I don't belong. And I can't. Fill in the blank, I can't, whatever. And almost every other lie falls into one of those 3 categories. That comes back to their narrative, the personal narrative that they have adopted to be true. And because we are storytelling creatures, those narratives drive all behavior. They drive our thinking, our choices, our worldviews. Narrative drives behavior. So for a how person, that I think much of that is sort of part natural gifting of how they're wired, and it's also been shaped by their previous experiences. So in their narrative, that particular narrative has shaped them to believe and place a higher value on the plan, to making sure that all the blanks are filled in so that they can play it safe and nothing bad happens. Because subconsciously, their brain is going, remember last time? Right. Like you're saying, who says? Well, someone said at some point, you're not going to be a good mom, or this isn't possible, which is why you're repeating that story back to yourself, which is why you have to choose to believe something different to eventually see something different. But with how people wow people, I think wow people need to be more empathetic to the how people in their lives to sort of step in and lean into hold their hand a little bit more instead of just be like, hey, anything's possible. And they'll be like, hey, I could use a plan. It's not that I'm not willing to go along with that, but like, can you tell me what the plan is first before we jump in?
Right.
And it's funny, I say the same thing all the time. I think I would be bankrupt again without my wife being a how person or dead in a ditch somewhere because I'm like, anything's possible, right?
You can do it.
But from her perspective, if I get a good idea, maybe I'm in the shower shampooing my hair and I'm like, oh, this is genius. I have to tell
all of our ideas are, for
exactly,
sure.
Right. So I'm like, babe, come here. Okay, so what if we... And so as a how person, what does she say? There's usually a hand on the hip. I don't know why you guys do that, but there's a hand on the hip. Now, how in the world are we going to do that, right? When how is introduced to wow too quickly, it shuts down the creative process. It shuts down wonder. So in your context, where you have a healthy team, which consists of both wow people and how people.
And you need both,
You need both. You have to honor the right part. There's a time for wow. There's a time for how. If how people are struggling with wonder and the wonder is being too intimidating, vice versa with the how people, I think have wow meetings and have how meetings. And a lot of times we blend the two together. And you can do this in your family, in your marriage. If there's a time where you're like, man, as soon as I introduce a wow idea, it's being met with how too soon, then that creative process is being shut down because we don't let wow breathe.
Wow.
So the simple way to let it breathe is to save meeting number 2 as a how meeting. Cool. Let meeting number 1 just be a wow meeting where anything's possible.
Dreaming, brainstorming.
Yeah. And it's also in your language. So if you're a how person listening to this, which again, you have your set of strengths, wow people need you, how people need to respond to possibility with open-ended questions. Like, okay, what if this happens? How would you respond to that? Which is very different than that won't work. So question marks instead of periods.
Yeah, I love that. I love how practical that is to help people because I think so often we want to honor each other. We know we need each other, but we bump heads and we are kind of like, fumble around in meetings. Like you said, when you were describing these 2 meetings, it made me think of even my writing process for the longest time. Like when I started out as a writer, I would try to write and edit at the same time. I would try to create. I'd have on my creative hat and my editing hat at the same time. And you can't create and edit because creativity, everything goes, and editing is only few things go. And I would get frustrated. None of my ideas would make it through. And so I was like, I got to wear 2 different hats. I'm going to put on my creative hat and anything goes, write it all out.
Yes.
And then switch gears.
Yes.
Put on my editing hat and let's edit and refine and make it better. But I think to your point, whether it's in the meetings or the focus of the meeting or even writing, whatever, when we try to do both simultaneously, we're killing the ideas before they have time to come to life.
Yes.
Or, we don't let the best ideas through. You know?
It's probably worth noting that I think our current culture creates more how people than wow people.
Okay, like what do you mean by that?
For example, if I do a magic trick, if I did something that seems impossible to you right now that amazed you, what would your first question for me be?
How?
Yeah. Where if you saw me do a magic trick for you 100 years ago, you might have wondered how I did that, but you just would have been fine going, wow, that was amazing.
Really?
And then you would have walked out of the theater and you would have been like, wow, what's that? Oh, they're calling those cars? You would have gone home and picked up a little device and held it to your ear and been like, man, I can talk to someone who isn't even in the same room with me. We lived in a culture where everything was filled with mystery and wonder. We were constantly amazed by things that felt very magical. But now we have these little devices in our pockets. Yeah. Not only are we in the information age, we have access to the secret to anything. So if you see me do a magic trick, or if I perform a magic show in a group of teenagers, they don't even say how. They immediately pull their phones out of their pockets. They're like, how does he, right? And that's because we have sort of been psychologically reconditioned in our modern age to feel uncomfortable with wonder. It almost feels threatening and disruptive to the status quo. So when we come in contact with mystery, we feel a responsibility to crush it immediately. So in a way, not only is our wonder being crushed by the trauma and the experiences in the world around us, but we are actively engaging in crushing our own wonder because we're so uncomfortable with mystery. So we've got to learn how to reverse that order, go back to turning that wonder switch back on.
That's so interesting. It makes me think of even just learning about my husband. He's an Enneagram 5. I'm an Enneagram 8 for anybody that's into the Enneagram. But one of the things that is a strength of his is he literally knows everything about everything. I'm like, will you please go on a trivia show and make us millions of dollars? Because put this to use. You know everything. I mean, I'm talking like C-level actors from like the 40s. I'm like, how do you know this?
Yes.
But in understand, he's fascinated and curious, but it's also that is his way to control his environment. If he has all the information. For me, it's like aggressiveness, like I'm just gonna like bulldoze through a room. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but I think all of us have this temptation to know how, to your point, to have all the information because it's available in our phone, through the internet, whatever. it's a way to control our world. It's like, well, no, you're not gonna sneak up on me, surprise me. Like I'm gonna control my environment by having all the facts, all the behind the scenes or whatever. This is so fascinating. I know that some people are listening to this and they're going, this sounds nice, but like, what would be a good starting point? I don't even know how to retrain my brain or how to catch those stories I'm telling myself. Some of those stories I've lived with for such a long time. For someone maybe that's like, you've fanned the flame of some hope in them that they could be excited about possibilities again. What would be something just really simple they could do this week to start to pay attention to their thoughts or change how they think about how they're using their imagination, to your point, that type of thing?
Yeah. Obviously, I'm using the metaphor as a switch for wonder. If there's a wonder switch, that means that there's some sort of electricity feeding that switch. And the good news is it just takes a spark. In the book, I outline something called the transformation map, and there's some steps back to wonder. And the first one is just a spark. That spark can trigger awe. Scientists are now studying positive awe states. And what we're discovering is that this state of positive awe, experience of wonder, is so powerful that it shifts the physiology in our bodies.
Wow.
You living in a state of wonder can decrease chronic inflammation, boost your immune system, decrease stress, increase your empathy, give you the ability to connect with other human beings on a more emotional level. That's just you living in a positive awe state.
Wow.
Why positive? Well, because awe is the root of the words awesome and the word awful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you could be like, oh my, I can't believe that she or he just did that, right? That's bad. We want positive awe states. And so we have to learn to expose ourselves to what I call magic. Magic is awe stimuli. What is the magic in the world? And so much of that is a return to childhood. So spending time with children, learning to get back into the way that you saw the world when you were a child, getting out in nature. These are just the simple, practical things. The deeper work is a re-examination of the narrative. If you were born with the wonder switch turned on, the good news is that you're not going to look for something that you've never had. It's less of a work of addition and finding something to add to your life like wonder and more subtraction. If wonder is your natural state because you came into the world believing that magic and therefore seeing it everywhere, then the real work is how do I get rid of what's in the way, what's blocking me, what's blinding me and keeping me from seeing the magic. And that's the difficult inner radical self-inquiry of healing from trauma.
Yeah.
So the person listening who says, I'm not enough, or I don't belong, or I can't be that type of mom, or I can't launch that business I've been dreaming about forever, that narrative didn't happen by accident. We take in 4,000 to 5,000 messages a day now in America. Some studies say as many as 10,000. That's 10,000 stories trying to shape your narrative, how you spend your time, how you spend your money. So I'm not enough wasn't imagined. That was birthed out of somewhere in your narrative. Something or someone or an experience convinced you weren't enough. You took it, assumed it was true. It became a part of your narrative, and now that narrative is driving your behavior and belief systems. So we have to challenge them. We have to go back and heal from some of those painful parts of our past to correct the story.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you just invite people into more. It doesn't have to just be the day-to-day feeling stuck in those stories and those narratives and just even just being bored in your own life. It's like opening your eyes, turning on this switch to the possibilities that are there. And then it's amazing because I think people will experience a completely different outcome simply because they started by believing and then that led to the actions. Okay, I know people want to know where they can get the book and where they can follow you and see everything you're doing and learn about your other work and everything like that.
The book is everywhere books are sold. If you want easy to access links, just go to thewonderswitch.com. You can even read the first chapter for free. Thewonderswitch.com. Learn all about the book. The rest of my work is found at harristhethird.com, and there's all sorts of opportunities for people to learn in and jump in and start learning for free through the different things that we're involved in.
I love it. The Wonder Switch, the difference between limiting your life and living your dream. This is so good. It's been such a fun conversation. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for hanging out with us, and thanks for spreading hope to our audience.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure.